Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. All participants have been placed on mute. If you have a question for our presenters, please enter it into the Q&A box. We will be monitoring questions as they come in, and we'll get to as many as time permits following the conclusion of the presentation. You will receive a survey at the end of the webinar. We ask that you please take a moment to fill it out. My name is Christy Beckman. I'm with the Nebraska Juvenile Justice Association, the Event and Training Coordinator. I would like to take a moment to thank a young high school student for making today's free webinar possible. Riley Grove learned about NJJA through the work of one of her parents. When she heard that canceling our annual conference had impacted the association financially, she wanted to do what she could to help. Unbeknownst to her parents, she solicited donations through a Facebook campaign for her birthday. Riley is a resident of Lincoln, a high school honor student, and is interested in pursuing a career in education. She has a passion for music. She plays percussion instruments in a drum group, as well as marching and jazz band. She also plays piano and guitar. Riley is a remarkable, compassionate young woman who will undoubtedly do many great things in her life, and we would like to thank her for her generosity and commitment to the community. Joining us today is Dr. Lindsay Hastings. She serves as the Clifton Professor in Mentoring Research and Research Director for NHRI Leadership Mentoring at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. She teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in leadership theory and leadership development, and her research centers around advancing scholar and practitioner knowledge in leadership mentoring, community leadership development, and youth leadership. Hastings is a 3-time graduate of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln with a BS in secondary math education, a master's in leadership education, and a doctorate in education leadership in higher education. Dr. Hastings is a resident of Seward, where she lives with her husband and 2 daughters, Lily and Anna. Dr. Hastings has been a mentor and friend to my family as well. Welcome, Dr. Hastings.
Thanks, Christy. I'm honored to be here, and I'm so thrilled to see the list of participants for today's webinar. My goal for today is not to talk at you for an hour, so I hope that you're interested in that kind of model as well. This talk will actually be designed to help you reflect on your talents and strengths and how those might contribute to building synergistic teams, in the hopes that that develops your capacity to help others engage in similar processes with the youth with whom you work. So I'm excited to do this, and please, at any point in time, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A, because I have also deliberately put together only a few slides and some activities, so that way we have plenty of time for questions, because I'm sure in the work that you're doing, understanding how to appropriately develop talents and strengths, as well as how to prepare youth to use those talents and strengths to build synergistic teams. My guess is you've had personal experiences that you'd like to process with the group. So I want to spend time, create time to be able to do that. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, so again, this entire webinar is designed around assessing your strengths as a leader, and then how to leverage those strengths to build synergistic teams. Today we'll be focused on a personal reflection for you, but again, in the hopes that this will allow you to engage in these similar processes with the youth with whom you work. Okay, so today we have 4 main objectives. One is around identifying your leadership strengths as well as talents. We'll talk about the difference between the two, to analyze environmental factors that influence the development of those strengths, and to examine in the context of 4 leadership domains. Gallup identified 4 leadership domains with their Gallup Strengths Finder, so we'll talk about that. And then analyze the relationship between identifying strengths and synergistic teams. Okay, so now why study strengths? Why spend an hour today focusing on strengths? Why didn't we spend this hour fixing your weaknesses? What's the value in this? And actually, interestingly, in the field of positive psychology, this dates back all the way to evolutionary biologists, right? So part of their evaluation as to why do we focus more on what's wrong than what's right, they date back to our ancestors in saying, look, survival of our ancestors was dependent upon their ability to assess threat and risk in their environment. And so, you know, here hundreds and thousands of years later, we still have a natural tendency to want to focus on what's negative within ourselves and within the environment, out of that need to assess risk and threat within our lives now. But what we're learning is that from a developmental perspective, it's critical that we study strengths. So I'm a former math teacher, so you'll have to excuse the number line. But this is why I think a little bit about why it's important to spend time deliberately thinking about strengths and the development of strengths. So when I was in school, history was a tough subject for me. I had to read the text multiple times. I'd have to write and rewrite my essays just to be an average student. So it took me, I'm labeling E for energy. It took a certain amount of energy for me to be an average history student. However, in math, I really excelled. Math was fun for me. It was something that I enjoyed. So when I applied that same level of energy to my talents, I ended up getting a lot more bang for my buck. And that when we spend time developing energy applying energy toward developing our talents, we have a greater return on investment. It doesn't mean we turn a blind eye to the things that we need to address in the way of weakness, but that when we apply that same energy towards talents, we end up getting a much stronger return on investment. And so as I thought about you and the work that you're doing, I thought this might be an important graphic to share, and to say that look, there are things within our lives, negative things within our lives that we have to address, certainly. However, spending deliberate time, effort, and energy on our talents actually gives us a really strong return on investment. Similarly, what we're learning in the field of positive psychology is that the absence of weakness does not equal the presence of strength. So I can spend time addressing my weaknesses so that they're not so glaring, but in so doing, I'm not also concurrently developing my talents into strengths. This is a separate process that needs deliberate, focused attention. Okay, so what I'd like for you to do is grab a writing utensil and a piece of paper, or otherwise if you just want to think about these questions, that's okay as well. These warm-up questions are designed to take a deep analytical dive into success and the contribution of talents and strengths to that success. So again, this is designed to be a personal reflective time for you, but the idea is also that you could use these questions with the youth with whom you work. Okay, so take 1 minute to answer the question, when did you feel most successful as a leader in the last 12 months? And Jenny asked a great question. Where do we answer this just to ourselves? And yes, this is just a personal reflection just for you. When you're done with that question, then I want you to identify what factors contributed to this success. So this is what's called identifying what's called developmental antecedents. So what were the things that gave rise to that success? when you're done with that question. And if you're still on question 1, that's okay. Which of your positive attributes did you leverage to help yourself be successful? So again, we're taking a deep analytical dive into success and the factors that contributed to the success, so we can think about what was the connection between our talents and strengths and the success. So sub-question to this is, how did you know you were utilizing a talent or strength? So when you think about your positive attributes that were leveraged to help yourself be successful, how did you know? What clues would you point to? So for example, I might say something like, well, I feel like I'm a good listener, and this is why this meeting with this student was successful. And when I think about clues, I might think of things like, this student opened up more, this student displayed emotions that hadn't been displayed before, we were able to have a more honest and frank conversation, right? So sometimes when we think about our talents and strengths, it's easy to just list them like the results you get on a Gallup Strengths Finder. But the idea behind this is to be able to deeply analyze the contribution of talents and strengths towards success. If you're still writing, that's perfectly fine. We'll move on, but you're free to continue writing. You know, I was just thinking, what's odd about a webinar instead of being together in person is that, you know, you normally just get kind of the white noise of people working on things. Well, in this environment, it's just a really creepy silence. So odd the things we miss from not being together in person. Okay, so again, the idea is that this is a time for you to personally reflect and really analyze your success and how talents contributed to that, with the idea of preparing or developing your capacity to be able to engage in this process with others. Okay, now in the field of positive psychology, and really Gallup and Gallup's founder, Don Clifton, really Gallup, Dr. Clifton, Dr. Hall, we're really at the epicenter of the beginnings of positive psychology, which is really exciting, that Nebraska really has been at the epicenter of all this. So in the early work of positive psychology, this is something that Gallup puts as part of their textbooks and writings on strengths-based psychology, they delineate between talents and strengths. So when we're talking about talents, we're talking about these natural recurring patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior, right, that can be productively applied. Whereas strengths are when you have that ability to provide consistent, near perfect performance, time after time after time, right? So a talent is basically a raw version of a strength, okay? Or in other words, a strength is a developed talent, if that makes sense. Okay, so now how does a talent become a strength? Anytime I'm working with youth and we're talking about the development of talents to strength, I use Michael Jordan as an example. You know, Michael Jordan, one of the best basketball players in the history of the sport, right? He averaged 30 points a game in the NBA, took the Bulls to six, I believe, NBA championships. Well, when I'm working with youth, I talk about, well, let's think about Michael Jordan when he was 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. You know, could Michael Jordan have scored 30 points in an NBA game? No, he couldn't have, right? So how did Michael Jordan go from having natural talent as an athlete to then becoming one of the best basketball players in the history of the sport. Like something happened between here and there. And how can we break that down even from a positive psychology perspective? Okay, so essentially there are three primary environmental factors that influence the development from talent to strength. Okay, so again, thinking about Michael Jordan, how did he go from having talent as an athlete to becoming one of the best basketball players in the history of the sport? So one of the first environmental factors that influence this developmental process is interaction with significant others. Somebody somewhere had to say, dang, Mike, you're pretty good. You're a pretty good basketball player. Like, imagine, would Michael Jordan have been the success that he was in basketball if not one person had ever pointed out that talent in him? Which to me speaks to how critical your role is in the life of youth, that you are likely someone in their life who points out those positive attributes in them. And that's a critical step in taking that natural talent to strength. The second environmental factor that influences this developmental process from talent to strength is opportunities for expression, right? Michael Jordan had many, many, many opportunities to practice this talent. So again, in thinking about your work with youth, not only is it important to reflect back that talent that you see within the youth with whom you work, but then finding them meaningful opportunities to express that talent and express that talent over and over and over again. The final environmental factor that influences this developmental process, which maybe isn't like top of mind or on the nose, is this notion of society's positive evaluation. So again, when I'm working with youth and talking about this developmental process, I'll talk about how, like, what had happened, what would have happened if Michael Jordan had grown up in Kenya, where the primary sport is soccer? You know, would Michael Jordan have been as successful there than here, knowing that we pack arenas to watch people play basketball, that we're in a society that positively evaluates talent in basketball. Now, in relation to the work that you're doing with youth, this can look like meaningful, intentional, positive praise for using the talent you identify within that youth, right? Creating meaningful opportunities for adults or peers to positively evaluate the use of that talent or strength. So this can be just a matter of like observing the youth with whom you're working, and then taking time afterwards to specifically talk about, oh my gosh, you know how I saw that you do a great job of, you have strong rapport, like it's really easy for you to build friends. I saw that when you were engaging with the new girl in your class, Nicole, that you sat next to her and you called her by name. That was a great example of how you used rapport, or that strong rapport talent. So that might be an example of society's positive evaluation. Okay, now the handouts that were provided, and I'm gonna do a new share here. Okay, now we're going to take some time to think about the differences between our own talents and strengths. So we're going to use this strengths bullseye, and I tried to fill it out, or create it as a fillable PDF. So my hope is that this will be pretty easy. Okay, so within the center circle, you're going to identify your top 4 to 5 strengths. And if you want to think specifically as your role as a leader, you can think about your top 4 to 5 strengths as a leader. Okay, so that's what you'll put in this center circle. Okay, so again, we're thinking strengths, we're thinking about where we can give consistent near perfect performance time after time after time, right? On this outer ring, this is where we will identify talents that we have as leaders. So where are some things where we know we have talent, but it seems to be pretty situational on whether or not we use it? And I tried to give you 3 different spots to identify talents. Okay, then outside the bullseye, now I want you to identify leadership strengths you see in others that you admire. Okay. So these are leadership strengths you admire that you see in others. I'll give you a couple minutes to complete this. And Tracy put in the chat how you can access the supporting documents, if you haven't seen that yet. Okay, once you've completed this strengths bullseye, then what I'd like for you to do is come back here, and this can be something on that piece of notebook paper where you did those warm-up questions. I want you to recreate this image, and where it says talent, I want you to put down one of the, well, actually, let's do this. Where it says strength, put down one of the strengths that you identified in that center circle. So replace this word with word strength with one of the strengths you put in that middle circle. And then what I want you to do is under these three arrows, identify who pointed out that strength in you when it was still a talent. When were you given the opportunity to express that talent? And when were you positively praised for the use of that talent? Okay, so again, this can be on the notebook paper that you use to answer the warm-up questions. Okay, if you're still working on this graphic, that's perfectly fine. We're going to move on, but feel free to finish. And again, the hope here is that you can engage in the same sort of process with the youth with whom you're working. Okay, so now let's think about, okay, once we have an understanding of our talents and strengths, how do we go about leveraging those to build synergistic teams? Okay, so when we think about synergy, we can dismiss the familiar equation of 1 + 1 = 2. There may be some of us who are familiar with this phrase and others that are not. The idea behind synergistics and building synergistic teams is this notion that when we build synergy, 1 + 1 = 3. What that means is that when we have a synergistic team, we have, by virtue of combining the talents and strengths of multiple people, the output from that team is greater than if each person worked on the same task or the group task independently and then summed their efforts at the end. Okay, so the idea is that when we bring people together on a team, that alone does not guarantee an output greater than if each person just summed up their individual efforts. I mean, think about those horrible group projects we did in college, right? Where or even in high school, where we got thrown together in a group and given this huge assignment, right? What was the natural process? We divvied up the work to try and make the work distribution equal, right? Some did their job, some didn't, right? And then one person probably took control because they didn't want to have their grade dependent on other people's work, right? That's not a synergistic team. So the idea is like, okay, when we have intimate knowledge and understanding of our talents and strengths, how can we use those to help teams function better? And that's the idea of synergistics. So the key to synergy is that we can create a synergistic team when each person is given a role based on his or her strengths. So this is something that I have my college students do. I place students in small groups early in the semester, and they work with the same group over an extended period of time. Then when the large assignment comes, I have them craft what I call a synergy strategy. Okay, so this is where I have them not just create this equal distribution of work, but rather have them meaningfully think about who should do what on this project based on what they do well. And the idea is that if I have spent multiple months in a team, I should have a fairly decent knowledge of the strengths and talents of each of my team members. So that way I, as a team leader, even someone on the team, I can be mindful about saying, oh my gosh, Christy, you have amazing input. It's like you do a great job of collecting ideas. I think this part where we need to collect articles about transformational leadership, I think you'd be really good at that part. So the idea is that we assign roles based on strengths rather than just equal distribution of work. Now, in crafting that synergy strategy, what I typically have my students do is answer 4 questions as they develop this synergy strategy. The first question I have them answer is, who are we as a team? And this is where we take an inventory of talent. So I also tell students that this is not a time to be bashful. Share what you think you do well so that the team is also recognizing what you think you do well and where you think you'd make a great contribution. Okay, so the nice thing is that when a team collectively has to answer this question, like who are we as a team, every person is given the opportunity to self-advocate, to be able to share where they feel like they have talent and strengths and where they think they could make a meaningful contribution to the team. The second question I have students answer is, where are we? Okay, so this is like analyze our givens. What kind of resources have we been given as a team to accomplish what we've set out to accomplish? The third question is around, where are we going? What is our goal? What's our intended outcome? What level of excellence are we going to demand of ourselves? And then how will we get there? And this is really where the synergy strategy comes to play. So how will each person play a role on this team, given where we are and where we're going? Who should take on what role based on strength, not based on just equal distribution of work, which just creates a really easy opportunity for control freaks to take control and social loafers to loaf, right? So if we create a synergy strategy, then each person is really held accountable to saying, this is what you said you thought you would do well to this, and so therefore we gave you this work based on what you thought you do well. Okay, one of the other handouts, and let me pull this up here. One of the other handouts that was provided with this webinar, we're not going to go through this, but I wanted to share this with you so you could use it with the youth with whom you work, or even within your own internal staff teams. So Gallup identifies 4 different domains of leadership strengths: the executing domain, influencing domain, relationship building domain, and strategic thinking domain. What you see here, the ones that are flipped 90 degrees, these are the 34 strengths that are part of the Gallup Strengths Finder. Okay, so they're arranged according to what leadership domain they fall within. So typically when I have a team coming together for the first time, I'll have them map out their strengths. Now, you don't have to have a youth or your staff complete the Strengths Finder necessarily if cost is going to be prohibitive. That's totally fine. What you can do is you can search Gallup's 34 strengths, and they'll give like a listing of just a basic description of these strengths. So you can have them just review those and self-identify their top 5 strengths. You're also not beholden to using these as well. I mean, you can also have students just self-identify their strengths and then map those out. But the idea is that if we can map out a team's strengths, we can start to see where we have strengths and perhaps limitations as a team. So for example, if I have a team where the majority of the strengths and talents are in the executing frame, like that's great. We're going to get a lot done, but we better make sure that we're intentional about relationship building activities as part of the trust building, part of the team dynamics, for example. Or if I have a group that's really heavy in the relationship building, like that's wonderful. Let's use that to our advantage in building trust in the early phases of our team processes. But then let's make sure we have a really well-defined plan for executing on what we said we would do to meet our goals, knowing that we may not have someone holding us accountable. Or we can also talk about how this helps us define roles or create roles within a team. So for example, if I have a person or two who has their top strength in executing, we might say like, okay, we would love for you to serve as like project manager. So you may not be generating a lot of content for this team project, but you're going to be the one that helps us stay on track, that helps us make sure we're meeting our deadlines, following up with people, asking if they need help, right? So this can also be helpful in assigning roles. So this isn't something that we're going to fill out today, but I thought it would be a useful tool for you moving forward. Okay. Now with that, I'd like to give you a couple moments now to come up with a question. So as we've talked about personal strengths, the difference between talents and strengths, how talents become strengths, and then how to leverage strengths to build synergistic teams, what questions arise for you? So I'd like to give you a minute or two to just draft a question, and this can be on your own, and then we'll come back together, and I hope you feel comfortable enough to share. We'll field some questions, and we'll talk for the remaining time together. When you're ready, go ahead and submit your question in the Q&A. Crystal asked a great question. She asked, how do you boost motivation for someone that has talent but is content with working at bare minimum capacity? That's such a great question. And I will also say as well, if you want to type in some comments to these questions as well, feel free to submit it through the chat feature. You're asking a great question. In my experience, when I have someone who is enormously talented, and everyone is enormously talented, right? It's a matter of finding it. When I find that I'm working with a student who's working at bare minimum capacity, oftentimes it has to do with their self-concept, right? And that for so long, their picture of themselves has been negative. So the thought of changing that paradigm becomes pretty difficult. So anyway, in times when I've had to work with students who have enormous talent but are working at bare minimum capacity, I sometimes have to take a two-pronged approach. And sometimes this has to involve a counseling professional. So one prong to the approach is to get to the understanding about why is minimal effort being applied to work or to school. So trying to understand the why, and then intentional time dedicated to talent sharing. And this can come from multiple people. So this could be something where I've had to do this as well, where I get together a cohort of adults in this student's life. So, I mean, this could be a teacher, this could be a parent or a guardian, this could be a peer, a family member, ourselves. And to say, look, I would love to create a little, like letter writing campaign to the student, to let the student know what talents we see, and then to help that student process what they're learning about themselves. So in so doing, we're creating meaningful opportunities for them to change the paradigm around their self-concept. But that's a great question. Great question. Jenny asks, I've taken the Strengths Finder before, but how do we identify our talents? Good question. So again, talents are just raw versions of strengths, and strengths are just refined versions of talent. So something to think about could even be going through the Strengths Finder results, your top 5, and then thinking through, what did this look like when it was a talent? You know, when did I recognize this, but I wasn't necessarily consistent in using it? If you are have the financial capability to do so, you can also get a full report of your 34. So you can look at talent themes that were identified in your top 10 or top 15, but weren't in your top 5, and to think about, like, okay, so these are definitely talents, but what do I need to do to help myself move those into the strengths category? What opportunities for expression do I need to pursue? Oh, Monica asked a similar question. Oh, this anonymous question, but a great one. Are there any characteristics or talents that make the perfect leader? And the answer is no. There is no one set of talents that are unanimous among successful leaders. So interestingly, some of the oldest work in leadership is in trait theory, like trait as in, like, what are innate characteristics common among successful leaders? And after decades and decades and decades and decades of research, we still don't have this one set of traits or innate characteristics that seem to be common among effective leaders. So the good news is there isn't one right way to lead. The idea is that if we have greater self-awareness of where we can contribute strengths and talents, we can keep putting ourselves in better and better positions to offer contribution in the best way possible. Great question. Tom asks, as you go through the exercise of identifying those traits that you feel make yourself a good leader, how do you go about validating that from the perspective of others? We don't want to fool ourselves into believing how wonderful we are in this. Very good, Tom. So actually, here's just an example of something that you could do. My family and I did this. I don't know if you remember, a long time ago, we got that huge blizzard right around Christmas. And my husband and I, we were with my parents. This was before we had kids. We were with my parents, and we couldn't go to church. We couldn't do any of the normal things that we would normally do for Christmas Eve. And so what we ended up doing, which was just so neat, and it's something we treasure now forever, what we did was we each got a piece of paper and we each listed the names of the people in the room. And then what we did was we identified one positive characteristic we saw in each person in our room, and then we shared. And it all went into this box. So, like, my dad got a box with all the little pieces of paper where we identified something positive within him, and I got a box with the things that my family members identified in me. And it was totally impromptu, but it ends up being this treasured piece, and it allowed me to see how other people see me. there's a phenomenon in psychology or positive psychology around consonance versus dissonance. And consonance is when the way you view yourself is reflected back in the way people see you. Dissonance is when the way I see myself is not reflected back from other people seeing me. Dissonance isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just a great data point, right, in our self-awareness work. That if the way I see myself is not reflected in how other people see me, well, why is that? So coming back to Crystal, this might be a great opportunity to create some dissonance for the student. Likely when we see students operating at just sort of minimal capacity, they don't view themselves very positively. And so to create this moment, lots of times that's influenced by negative self-concept, not always, but that can be a big contributor. So if we create these sort of dissonance moments of saying, look at how other people see you, look at how many times adults or peers within your life identified this in you, that's a pattern, that's something to celebrate. And that might be different from how they viewed themselves. And there's power in sort of infecting our thinking. Monica asked a great question around, if most of your individual or team strengths are in one category, are there strategies for being intentional about developing other categories? So great question. The answer is yes. And many times we don't have a lot of time to necessarily take a whole team through professional development and strategic thinking if they don't have strategic thinking. But it may be just as simple as, let's talk about it. We don't have none of our team members have talents in the strategic thinking category. What are the pitfalls associated with that? And how can we go about addressing it? So sometimes that might mean bringing in an ad hoc committee member when you're developing a strategic plan, for example, or to identify a project management plan. Maybe we need to bring in someone on an ad hoc basis to help us think in that way. Or sometimes it might be a matter of, oh, well, one of our team members has like their fourth or fifth strength in this area. How could we intentionally assign them roles to sort of elevate those, to use those for the benefit of the team? So sometimes it can be a matter of bringing in somebody out external to the team to help in that area, or sometimes it's a matter of just having a reflective conversation about what would be the pitfalls of not having anyone on our team with top strengths and strategic, and how might we go about addressing it? Great question. Oh, great. An anonymous question was around, I can see how this information would be helpful even in a work environment with other staff. How do you motivate staff to create synergistic teams instead of the general approach to divide and conquer equally? So again, I'll share these slides. Feel free to share this around. Here's what we can expect from a synergistic team. When we're deliberate about creating synergy, we can expect output to be greater than if each of us just divide and conquer and then sum up our efforts at the end. Right? That's one approach, but it will give us limited return. We can have expanded return if we work synergistically, where we assign based on talents rather than just divide and conquer equally. So feel free to share these, and it can be, and use me as an excuse. I attended this webinar and this was kind of interesting. What do you think about this idea? So rather than you coming into the team and saying, here's a philosophy we should engender, or rather it can be like, oh, I went to this webinar and we talked about this. This was interesting. What do you all think? Or what might that look like on our team? That way you can use me as an excuse. Okay, Alicia asked a great question around, how do you guide a staff member's strengths to contribute to the team as a whole when the tendency seems to be more individualized? Great question. So again, this comes back to that talent to strengths model, right? Where those interactions with significant others becomes really critical. In that oftentimes we don't just point out a talent or a strength once, we have to point it out many times. So sometimes we may have a staff member who maybe recognizes that talent, or they got the results on the Strengths Finder and they agree with it, but they don't really know how they use it, when they've used it in the past, and how it contributes. So like those warm-up questions, again, that could be something that, you blame me for why you want to use them with your team to say, okay, or even to say like, based on, the talents and strengths that we've identified that you identify in yourself, how do you see yourself using those talents for this specific project? So you can kind of tailor those warm-up questions to think more specifically about, like, what do we want success to look like on this team? And then based on those talents, how do you see you using those to help meet that sort of metric for success that we've identified? Great question. Tammy asked a great question around taking the Strengths Finder in the past. How often should we take this as people grow and change? Great question. Now, Gallup would tell you that your top 10 strengths tend to stay the same, just reorder themselves throughout time. So I don't want you to feel like you have to take and retake, because first of all, it costs money. But also there may be some that change order and some that don't. I've taken the Strengths Finder, I think 3 times. And I've seen some strengths show up consistently. Some have reordered. If you are able to get that 34 report so you can see your top 10, top 15, those are the ones that you're going to want to focus on. Situations may determine order at times, but for the most part, these are designed to be considered innate yet developable over time, if that makes sense. Terrell, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, asked a great question around how do you approach lack of strength in an area in an attempt to shift to a more productive strength? Great question. I've talked about this a lot with my students. This is where there's power and vulnerability. So not only is it critical that we talk about what we do well and where we think we can offer the greatest contribution, it's okay as well to say, here's where I tend to fall off the wagon and where I don't think I'd be very helpful. That's okay too, because if we're still focused generally on here's what I think I do well, here's where I think I can contribute, ultimately, we're moving in a productive direction, but it's okay as well to be vulnerable about the things that you don't think you'll do well and to ask for help. That's okay too. So for example, if you see one of your team members identify a strength in an area that you really struggle with, that's a great opportunity to take that person out for coffee, grab lunch together and talk about, tell me how you go about using this strength, because it's definitely an area where I don't have strength and I feel like I could really learn from you, or just say I'd love some mentorship and guidance. And again, not with the idea that you have a weakness that suddenly now is going to become a strength, but it may just be a matter of taking that, and that does 2 things. One, it shows that person that you admire them. And everybody likes that. That's a positive thing. And my mom used to always tell me, people love to talk about themselves. So give people an opportunity to do that. So for you to take time to acknowledge a strength and talent other, to ask for some mentorship and guidance about how they use that, can do a couple of things. One, it creates a stronger relationship between you and that team member. And 2, does give you some meaningful guidance about how to maybe manage something that you struggle with normally. Another great question is around, is there a good exercise to help identify strengths and talents for those that struggle to identify them in themselves? Yeah, so kind of like the activity I talked about that I did with my family around Christmas, that could be a great opportunity for someone to hear from other members of their team about what they see in them. Now, I will tell you, this is an exercise that takes time. It takes a lot of time. So this wouldn't be something that I would do as a 15-minute warm-up to a meeting. I would dedicate, part of a holiday celebration or a retreat to have that conversation, because this is definitely something you don't want to rush. And so something else that I do when I facilitate a similar activity with my students is called the sticker exercise, where students identify on a sticker strengths that they see in their fellow small group members. And then actually they take that strengths bullseye, and on the back, each person puts down their sticker of what they saw in that person. So that could be a meaningful way to have an activity that's structured around that. The other thing I do in the facilitation of that activity is I make sure that the person who's speaking looks looks the person in the eye for whom they're talking about that talent. So for example, if I'm talking to Christy, if I'm pointing out the talents and strengths I see in her, I look at her and say, Christy, here's what I see in you, and here's why I think that's so neat. And if we get that eye contact, it's just another way to share how special that feedback is. So that would be something I would suggest is, have everybody fill out the strengths bullseye. So this is where they identify strengths they see within themselves, talents they see in themselves, talents or strengths in others that they admire. And then on the back, have people write down strengths and talents they see in them. And in so doing, it creates this picture, right, of consonance or dissonance, but it does create this picture of like, here's how I see myself versus how other people see me. And it could be a great point for self-reflection. Okay, Randy asked a great question around society's positive evaluation. He's saying that it's a new concept. I know this is a short presentation, but I need additional examples and discussions to get to what you're asking. Okay, so when we're talking about society's positive evaluation, this is something where I would say don't overthink it. It's just a matter of like somebody else positively evaluating the use of that talent to say, oh my gosh, you did such a great job at using this talent to make this positive outcome. That's all that means. So it's like positive feedback, reinforcement, if you will. So when we talk about interactions with significant others, that's maybe where somebody points out that talent. And then society's positive evaluation is then evaluating that person positively for the use of it. Or, oh my gosh, I can see how your talent and strategic thinking really made a difference in helping our team be productive in this conversation. And Randy, if you need additional examples, just let me know and I'm happy to provide. Okay, I've got another question here. I may need a little bit of clarification. It says, how could one devolve talents for the team as a whole while fostering individual talents? I may need just a little bit of clarification for that question. So if whoever wrote it would be willing to clarify, that would be great. I don't know if that means like, could one bring down a team while still fostering their individual talents? I just wasn't quite clear on that. Evolve. Okay, so maybe the word was evolve. Which is it? I'll answer that, and then if that's not quite right, then we'll come back to it. So the idea around synergy, right, with developing team capacity can be accomplished through the development of individual talent. So if I can understand better what I do well and how I can use that to contribute positively to the team dynamic, in so doing the team benefits as well. So the good news is that by fostering individual talent development, we can also productively apply that learning and self-awareness to the dynamic of the team. But the key is that has to be intentional. We can't assume, for example, that if everybody takes a strengths finder on our team, now we will have a synergistic team. The creation of synergy has to be intentional, and it has to be something that the team works on collectively, right? That we collectively agree that we're going to assign roles based on talents, and that every team member sees that connection between what they do well and how they're using that for this particular task on the team. Good. Okay. Well, I think we're at the end of our questions here. I want to thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I am moved that so many of you were interested in attending. That's lovely. And please know that I will share my contact information as well. Please feel free to email me anytime. I work at UNL. I'm only there part-time just due to COVID, and so anyway, I work from home just as much as I'm on campus. So I would say email me, but feel free to email me about any questions that you have. And if you have questions that come up after this, that's perfectly fine, no problem. And I'll be sure to share the slides as well. So again, thank you so much for having me here. Christy or Tracy, do you have any final comments or directions to the group? You're muted.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hastings. That was a wonderful, engaging presentation and so many questions. Thank you very much to the attendees for offering up those questions. And yes, as you explained, we'll share the slides. And if anyone has any questions, they can email you or email me, and we can make sure we get them to you. So yes, if we can wait, a couple more minutes if anybody else has a question to throw on there.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, just from the comments, it sounds like everybody really enjoyed this.
Well, I hope it was useful.
It was very informational, definitely.
Good.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you so much, Dr. Hastings, and we will sign off.
Sounds good. I'll send you those slides, Christy.
Okay, thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.